Meine Damen und Herren Denker!
Was a hazard, actually. I studied orchestration a lot, but I never thought to teach it. And in Germany, in France, you study a lot of orchestration. In Russia too. In Germany, there was no orchestration class. And I arrived to Berlin, in Berlin for the residency, an artist residency, the DAD Berliner Künstlerprogramm. And then when I finished, the professor for composition there, Hans-Peter Kiburz, asked me if I wanted to teach orchestration separately from composition. In Germany it was always mixed, separately from composition for his students at the Hans Eisler Berlin Conservatory, which I accepted. There are perhaps two answers. So the first one is pragmatical. I started to teach orchestration, and I must say that in France, when I studied orchestration, I studied with 4 teachers, and most of them were very intuitive. They were like this old school, here something is missing, but they couldn't explain why. And then at the Paris Conservatory, I studied with someone called Marc-André d'Albavie, and he had very clear verbalized concepts, directionality, non-directionality, things that I use, mixture, type of doubling. And suddenly I saw that with this idea of verbalization, I could understand better the score. It was speaking. When you verbalize, you see the things better. And so I started to teach in Berlin, and I could see that through those concepts, of course, the students were understanding faster the music. And so I gained experience for that. And it's true also that I have a particular passion that I don't understand yet, but for all this question of what is verbalized, what is not verbalized. You know, it was in the center of my PhD. I read Derrida, so I come from jazz, but I come also from mathematics. All those questions in music, what can we speak about and what we can't? And Derrida speaks about this frontier between the unspoken and the speakable. Or before, I was a fan of a French philosopher called Vladimir Yankelevich, who wrote many books on music, but one is music and the ineffable, what you can't speak about. And both the epistemological aspect and the love for the music, the love for the sound, the love for the, I think, interacted. And I started in teaching to think, wow, we could develop the thing of Marc-André d'Albavie. Here I understand that, perhaps also because I studied mathematics, I like to categorize things. So it developed slowly. And when I became professor for composition at Columbia University, I proposed to teach orchestration parallelly. I could see that it was useful for the student. I think it's a very useful thing for the student. And I was teaching that. And what was interesting that one of my colleagues was Tristan Murail. He was also teaching orchestration. And people were going to his class. Then they were coming to my class. They got those concepts, verbalized concept, directionality, non-directionality, and suddenly they did other progress, let's say. So I could see how efficient it was, this sort of what I called later the functional orchestration. And I had exchanges with other students of d'Albavie, former students of d'Albavie who had the same experience. So, and I started, since I like this sort of theoretical thing, to develop more and more those concepts. 2 things happened which pushed me to research more. The first thing was, and it was concomitant, so it was, let's say, beginning of the 2012, perhaps something like that. 2016. At McGill University, there is a psychoacoustician called Steve McAdams who started an international program called ACTOR. So it's ACTOR. It's an acronym for orchestration. So it was his idea was he's a specialist of timbre and perception, and to contact many people working on timbre, mostly acousticians, psychoacousticians, also composers, and to make an international project on orchestration. And the project was already advanced with some teachers, and they had a huge software, for example, called orchestrate, where the idea was you have a score and everybody can put the techniques, and we can confront the techniques, and there is a sort of science through, and like that we have a database of orchestration analysis and a database also on all techniques which exist, which I don't believe because the techniques are different from one teacher to the other. So that is big thing, and they contacted me for that, and then I said so, and they had these two columns. They had once all the effects, what is called the psychoacoustician effect, and then all the techniques. So here you do that, etc. And I arrived with my thinking and said, no, but something is missing in between. This is what I call the function. It means function are more universal. The technique depends of the period, the epoch, the time, the people. And I must say, I changed a little bit their software, which they had to stop later because they could see that the techniques were very local and that you had something in between, which they call the aim or the function, means what for. And it's a sort of effect, but translated into musical words. What is the sense? We know what is the doubling. They have the technique doubling, but what is the aim of the doubling? And if you remember, we have 7 aims for the doubling, etc. So there was this international project, and I had to think about that a little bit, confronted to those people who said, and I developed a lot, exchanging with them, and really we had fantastic discussion. For 2 years I could fix the notion of mixture, again them often, but what is a mix? What is a texture? Sorry, or they were using the old word for coupling. I had to think about that, so they helped me to go further in these things. They invited me at McGill University. They invited me in other things. It was really a collaborative project. We did a project on Ravel, Alborada del Grazioso, where everybody analyzed it. It's online, and we could compare the different orchestrations. So it was really pushing scientifically that. And parallelly, you have a society in Germany which is called the GMTA, which is the German Society for Music Theory. I didn't know really what it was. And they organized, it was 2014, something like that, or 13, I can check. They organized a big, it's where all the theoreticians meet from Germany, Switzerland, Austria, which I didn't know at that time. But they have always a topic, and they organized something on timbre. And they invited me to be keynote speaker for that thing, to speak about my functional orchestration. And on my big surprise, because I thought it was 20, 40 people, you are keynote speaker, and we had 200, 300 people in front of me where I spoke about functional orchestration. But it forced me to write the first article. Until then, I had no idea of writing something on functional orchestration. I was obliged for their book, which was published. So it was published in 2016, I think, and it was my first article on functional orchestration. So teaching students, think that it was very efficient for them, also for the composition. Of course, I love orchestration for my own music, for doing this research, it became a sort of second center in my life, both in terms of science and of course for my own music, where I love orchestration. So this is what I try to explain. A function compared to a technique or an effect. An effect, this is a result. for example, the dynamic, you have an increase of dynamic. I give a function. This is the aim. This is what do you want to do, and then you find the right technique to do that. The example that I give often so that people understand is generally we mix technique and function, and they are not the same. To create a crescendo as a function, you can of course make every instrument doing a crescendo, but this is not the only technique, it's not the most efficient technique. For example, you can add more instruments, or by the classic, you can put the horns higher. It creates a crescendo. So here you see that there is a difference between the technique, which is on the paper, created a crescendo, and the aim. What do I want to do? I want to do a crescendo as an effect. So the function this is there. This is I want to do a crescendo. Another example will be with the doubling. We all know what is doubling as a technique. It's two instruments together, it's there. But what aim? You have doubling for precision. You have doubling for opening the space. You have doubling for reinforcements of the dynamic. You have doubling to create new sounds. And here you can categorize it there. So this is the function. This is what for, and we try to define those aims, which are acoustic or psychoacoustic aim, but with musical terms. So it goes beyond the psychoacoustic. For example, how to do a contrast, how to do a relay, what is the texture, and here we mix. It's where musicology and psychoacoustic meet. Means the texture was defined musicologically very badly. Texture in musicology is everything. It can be a contrapoint, etc. And you have the psychoacoustician who work on objects which are perceived as one object which merge. And here you have the function. Now, a texture will be that new definition, and how to do texture, and which sort of category do we have for texture, and how to do that. So you see, it's something very musical where we categorize the aim, the goal, but they have a sort of goal to be universal compared to techniques which are related to which instrument do we have, which composer you are, and what time you live. The goal of the functions will be to be universal, to apply to electroacoustic music or to instrumental composition. In my book, which will be published, or in my articles, there are examples starting with Haydn, until Beat Führer, Unzumchin, Ligeti, Grisey, Lachenmann, Clara Janota. Of course, this is exactly that, the goal, that it applies to new music as well, because those goals are universal. When I teach, I do that chronologically, so we start with the first thing, but it's a way to read the score. Or I have colleagues in electroacoustic who learned a lot from those functions. One says exactly the same thing. When I speak about sound mastering functions, of course, it applies to a lot of things in music. So it's completely universal, yes. And even you understand things on music of other cultures sometimes. I will try to be short because it's a huge question, but of course I never write directly. And I try, it's a very long process. I try first to have, it's something where you have different etaps. The first thing is to find the idea, which takes a lot of weeks or months. Currently I am writing a new orchestral piece. This is my 5th month without writing. I wrote some sketches, but I removed them. It's what do I want? Then when I know what I want, I would call that a sort of sounding image. It can be sometimes more, of course, sometimes I need a particular harmony inside that, or spectrum, or a particular rhythm, or it can be an idea, a project. But let's say for the orchestration, sounding image, then how to realize it, and then I start to do sketches, particularly I try an accord, and on the big orchestral score, I can write that. It's back and forth, but the back and forth is just to create the possibilities of a choice, let's say, the best choice, what I call the step 1, step 2, step 3 method. It means not to say step 1, my first impulse, but is it the best? Step 2, step 3, add that, we do that, it's even more interesting to do that, and I will add this instrument. So it's like cooking, of course. It's like creating something. You take time to have the best result you could do by yourself. It has to work, it has to be playable, so you have a lot of constraints when you orchestrate. But first, the most difficult is, what do I want? Here I am very conservative, perhaps. I know that some of my colleagues use Orchidia or something like that. It's completely intuitive, particularly for orchestration, for rhythm, for harmony. Of course, I check with synthesizers. Sometimes I put that. I work on the paper, but I try to check if it works. For orchestration, it's with experience. I do mistakes too, but it's completely internal here, I think. On the paper, on the table, even almost never listening to a simulation on the computer, because I know the directionality won't be there, etc. So it's really, really first. The thing is that sometimes I write and I correct the score after the premiere, but it's mostly intuition and on the paper. The occasion was very strange. You don't have 1,000 ways to write for orchestra. Either it's a commission, now it's a commission for donation on my next piece, but here it was very strange. It was a German university in Bielefeld, horrible university, completely all in beton, very modern, was created in '68, and they have a concept in Germany. It's called the Free University, means a reform university. This is universities who are very liberal, made so in beton, very modern, and it's very known in Germany in sociology, etc. And this university was doing her 50 years of creation in 2018, and they had the crazy idea that to show that they are very modern, they wanted also to premiere a composer, and they met with me, and they wanted the most provocative and experimental piece for orchestra, played by the Bielefeld Orchestra, and where it speaks about the university. So I had a lot of constraints there. We met many times. I was not sure to do that, but I said, okay, it's an occasion to write an orchestral piece. And I said I will not write only for orchestra, because the orchestra are not the most experimental people. So I decided, and also I needed words, texts, which were provocative. And I decided to ask the Neue Vokalsolisten, Stuttgart, who are very experimental, to come and to make a piece for orchestra and 6 singers with text. And this is a story of the 2 first movements. And at the beginning, I wanted to do something on, science, not science, art, etc. And it started to be even more, and it started to be on what is art? I am now in an age where I could look a little bit backwards. I can see what my students are doing. I wanted to do something in homage of my students, because I teach for very long. And I was also working in the science, so I could compare that. I did a lot of research for that. And it was a way to speak to the university and crazy, both epistemologically and being crazy. And the third movement is different. So I found a lot of texts. It could be everything. It could be Bergson. It could be on university. The university was, once it was premiered, they were a little bit because they discovered it was very experimental and very provocative, and they were not prepared on that. And second thing, they thought it was an apology of the fake news. Because induire en erreur, misleading, the art of misleading in English, they thought I was, but it was not at all that. So they took the provocation one-to-one, which was good. But there are three movements, and the three movements are all about, it's a metaphor by Herder, the philosopher Herder. These are three edges of the artist. So he speaks about the young artist who is full of passion but doesn't have the experience and wants to change everything. Then you have the middle-aged artist by Herder, who is someone with good experiences but starts to be used to, he knows what he has, and this is where I am. And then you have the very old artist who look back, perhaps conservative, knows everything, etc. So it was a model. It was in two movements in Bielefeld, and then I added a third movement, which was premiered. So the two movements were premiered in Ultraschall Festival in Berlin. It's in January, a big festival. It was a Radio Symphony Orchestra. And the first movement on the young artist is dedicated to my students. It's called The Art of Misleading. In the center, I use many texts, but in the center, I use a text of the young Anton Artaud. Anton Artaud was a sort of surrealist or crazy guy in the 20s, who wrote 5 letters, provocative letters, 1 letter against his parents, for example, and 1 letter, this is the one I use, is a letter to the director of the universities of Europe, where he said that they don't understand how works the brain, nothing to do with 2 + 2 is 4, it's much more complex, the brain is a labyrinth, etc. And so I use this text in the middle, a long text, an excerpt of this text, and I put other sentences which are important for me. The movement is dedicated to my students. Like there is a sentence by Rabbi Nachman, who is a rabbi, who says, don't ask too much, because if you ask too much to your teacher, you take the risk not to be able to lose yourself. So I like the idea of misleading and trying. There are some sentences coming from the psychology. There are people who are specialists of creative psychology. They work mostly for IT people, but this is called divergent thinking. So that is the first movement. A lot of text, and that is the first movement. The second movement is sort of middle-aged artists, and I take just a very short sentence, which is a sentence by Nietzsche, which I love, which is a sort of very good definition of what is an artist for me. He says, I try to do by, an artist is someone who consciously or unconsciously takes what other people will consider as a form, in the sense not important, as contained. The car which we hear, for everybody, for us it could be music. The light for visual artists, the light of the score could be something. So, and it's why also we were obsessed with things. This is what it means. And then he says, second part of the sentence, it's why for most artists, they don't live in the real world, because what is really contained will be just form for them. And I take just this sentence that you don't understand, and I open it very slowly, and you don't really understand, and there are a lot of misleading things. And the last movement is dedicated to, so the second movement is dedicated to a friend of mine, Andrei Adamek, And the last movement is dedicated to Simra Rom, old one. I use some rhythmical texture that and here I use excerpts of a poem from Apollinaire, his last poem before he died, where in a few words it's a beautiful poem where he says, I know that I am experienced, I traveled a lot, but all what I did, I can swear, I didn't want to be a rebel, I didn't want to provoke, but it was like that. I respect the tradition, but we are just here to open new windows, etc. Please have a pity of me. And this is a beautiful text of an old artist who looks back and try to define what is art. So there is the sentence, there are other sentences in this. So this is a three movements of this piece of what is to be creative and an artist. I would answer in a non-answer. I am strongly convinced, even if I am pretty analytical, that as an artist, I am not here to write my own teleology. And I think it was a big problem of the 60s where they tried to position themselves historically. Second thing, I say often, we are not here to write culture as an artist. We are a plant. We have to care about our own obsessions. And this is other people who will say, this plant, there's something from Grisey perhaps, or I can see his obsession for a very complex, misleading rhythm which comes perhaps from his interest of the Pygmies music, like in the third movement, where I have some structure where it's an homage to our repertoire called In the Who, etc., etc. So I have a lot of influences, certainly in this piece, Sherino, etc., I don't know, but certainly not me to know that. It's other people who say that, because I have to propose what I want to propose. And I was only interested into what do I like, what do I want to do, which sound do I want to have. So I wouldn't answer this question because I think it's on my role. Of course, this piece is part of a catalogue of other pieces where I have needs, where I go further, and there are some specificities of that piece. It's not my first orchestral piece. It's my fourth one, I think, with some ensemble piece, but the fourth one. There is one orchestral piece, for example, which is even more provocative, where we're thinking about orchestration. It's called Pour Orchestre, where I even interrogate what is a conductor. There is a cadenza for conductor alone, where in Pour Orchestre I put the strings in the back and the winds in the front to have other sounds, etc. This piece, it's different, it's about art, it's singers. So first difficulties was what is the relationship between the singers and the orchestra. The orchestra is pretty loud here. I could do that like much less, but I wanted to have orchestra, so I put mics on my three singers. I wanted also singers to be part of the orchestra, so they are inside the orchestra, so it's another difficulty. Second thing, I need quarter tones because of my harmonic language, but as you know, it's very difficult to have quarter tones with the strings, which actually for the next piece, the nation, I will have some strings which are detuned, but it's very difficult. If you look at Haas, at Ligeti, it's very difficult. But generally I do that with the winds, so it's not my first piece, where I detune half of the winds, 1/4 tone below, and so that they play perfectly. You have one group, so the second flute, second clarinet here, etc. They are detuned, so they play together the same intonation, and the first, etc., they have the normal intonation. So it's why it's detuned. Then I built some PVC small tubes like that. It's an instrument that I love. Actually, it's not the first time that I use that. I wrote when I was, it was 2000, no, it was even before 2000 or even 99, 2000. I received a commission for a viola concerto. And the piece is called Erreur. And if you know my music made on Misleading, on textures, on mosaics, where it's a lot of points and you can differentiate if someone or something is part of the whole or if it's a solo, etc. It was very paradoxical to write a concerto. And for that reason I said yes. And there are many things in this piece. The violist, it's not, I didn't write something for viola, solo and orchestra, but I call that viola solo and 51 orchestral musicians in Erreur, where the viola is playing with people, they are alone, but sometimes they are not alone, or the viola itself is 6 or 8 different instruments. So long stories, but to make short, in Erreur, I was thinking, okay, I want something which is the opposite of my viola. And I had the idea, okay, I do to the minimal instrument. So I have the one flute playing this PVC tube, doing only one note. Instrument which costs 50 cents. So the sort of opposite, a sort of deconstruction of what is an instrument in the Western world. What is interesting that these things, this is a Pygmies or Central African ethics, where the instruments are very simple, you know. The Pygmies, they take what they can, they take a plant, and they do great music. And you have a repertoire that we studied when I was there, not by the Pygmies, but by the Hindu does that, but it's also the Uldeme in North Cameroon, where they use flute with one pitch. So it follows me for very long, and here I decided to do that for the 3 singers, and probably for the next piece it will be 30 people who will have this sort of huge flute, pan flutes playing that. So that is for the small thing. And then there was this sentence by Nietzsche, where you say form becomes contained and small thing could be interesting. And I had the idea, it's at the end of the second movement, I have this long moment where I was thinking, what could be an object? I don't want to be inflationary with accessories. You see many composers today who use a lot of accessories. Why not? Children games. I didn't want that. I wanted to be very minimal, just those 3 tubes, and something even more stupid, something doing only one sound and very cheap. And because I have children, I had the idea of this children brush, you know, who are in plastic, and where you can do a sort of Gérard or perhaps with a tube like that. And the idea which comes from Nietzsche, which is our goal as a composer, how with this minimal thing can we do something big? So you have these 3 singers having this brush, and they do just 1 pitch, 2 pitch, they have 2 tubes, that, and like that. And from that I develop a form, so it's about, okay, I need percussion instruments which imitate that, I need a contrapoint, I need a language for that, where you hear those things. And then I came to the idea of preparing, not really preparing the instrument, but using the instrument to have this brush imitated, and you have this long rhythmical coda, where the strings take everything on the guitar with 4 positions, where it's and starts from this small brush, something which evolves. So always the idea of what we call in orchestration with actor meta-timbre, so this sort of analogies. You have an analogy of a sound, and you try to exhaust the idea of this instrument in in using kabasa, etc., using a lot of instruments to imitate these sounds and to make a music from that, not only anecdotes. Of course, the text has to influence, and not only this one, but the three texts influence the sounds that I wanted. It's always a back and forth with which text, which sound, and when you are blocked, you use the text. By Artaud, the beginning you have the guy reading his Artaud, and he says, dear directors of the university, and it was Premier Bielefeld, so you had all those professors, and after he shouts, and this shout is orchestrated, of course, with the orchestra. At the end, you have of this movement, for example, they start to speak very, very quickly, and you have, it contaminates the orchestra where you have all those cells already, but then the orchestra starts to say those with the voice, those vocabulary. So you have many ways, many moments where everything tracks, of course. I can answer. Means I try to be creative. So it's true that when Grisey told me that, I didn't understand, and now, 30 years later, I understand what you wanted to say. I can't write big blocks. I don't know why. Always, if I have one line, the line, if you look more in detail, will have small details. And so I wrote a small piece for 5 instruments called Apropos, about the visual art that I like. And it's about 5 authors, and one is about, it's an homage to Tim Hawkinson, who is an American artist. And I like him because, for example, you look at Tim Hawkinson, you have an illustration like that, and if you look more in the detail, you have suddenly one hair being the clock. So this sort of small detail, big detail, textures, things. Now I understand more and more, it's like that. And I spend a lot of time composing, because you can imagine it's like mosaic, making mosaic. It's really exhausting to compose, it's really slow, it's really difficult to compose those pieces, but I can't write big notes, long notes, I can't. I don't know why, it's perhaps neurosis. And then, of course, it influences a lot of things. For example, I don't remember where it is, but sometimes I use the strings, and it's not the first piece like that, where I use the mass of the strings to create a texture where everybody's solo. It's very difficult for orchestral musicians. I remember so everybody, and it's moving inside so in Pour Orchestre. I even use the geography of the orchestra, where you have small mosaics, small texture, which move geographically through the orchestra. So I have 5 musicians playing and going there, and you can follow in the orchestra the people. Here it's the same case. You have a moment. So for example, if you take in the second movement, let's say page 33, those movements, letter A, those texture with the harmonics, which are all calculated, which pitch they do, etc., and they play this sort of small mosaic, which I will do in the next piece even more. It's a bigger orchestra, and of course for an orchestral musician it's difficult, because suddenly the 5th thing his solist has to at least play the load without following the first one. Something that I did in Pour Orchestre a lot, which I do here. So you see it's a sort of relationship between a sort of epistemological or philosophical question. How does it sound? It gives you idea of texture or sound or things like that, and it's a back and forth. If you want, I can give a second example of that idea. Came very quickly the idea of 3 singers, and of course, because of this illness that I write with pencil of one hair. It was not having one singer doing that, one singer doing that, one singer doing that, but it was always misleading. So you have some sentences with E, O, A, E, or building this sort of virtual instrument when you have two people and doing all the combinations, changing of register, which is also ethics by the pygmies. As you know, they yodel, because by the pygmies, when you are in group, you don't want to recognize the soloists. So you have 20 people, but it's counterpoint of I don't know how many voices which have nothing to do, and it's always what is called cross rhythm. And when you have only one instrument, you split this person is plural. So the repertoire in the Who, you yodel, but you have also a flute doing E, A, O, E, O, A. So always this game that I love, which is present in all my music, and here the treatment of the voice is also like that, where you have three singers, but actually you don't have three virtual singers, you have much more. So for the instruments also, I have some techniques. It's difficult, I don't remember. But for example, I developed a technique, I call that pits rayonnant, where you have pits and each musician goes to another direction. In this notation, it didn't work as much as I wanted because I think they didn't vibrate enough. I have to make a long vibrato, but the idea is to have a sort of percussion instrument to pium, which explodes. Then I have, of course, a technique that I have all the time in my music. It's analogies, exchanges, paradoxes where you don't know where you are and you exchange small elements of music in the first movement, but or sounds in the second movement, the use of very particular sounds. So it's this misleading is always there. In the second movement, perhaps we take, because it's easier, I create virtual instruments where you have, as you said, the bass with the instruments. He jumps from the fry to the contratenor to the falsetto register, so he jumps all the time. Then they play with the tube, so you don't know if they play, if they sing, and I imitate that with the instruments themselves. The way I orchestrate, I imitate the sound of this tubular, this tube, this PVC tube. I have those small mosaics, of course, with a very, it's a technique that I use in many of my music. I have a sort of simple rhythm. We think it's a simple rhythm, but we're obliged to always check from where it comes, to exchange this misleading, this cognitive misleading, I call that. So, so you're completely confused who does that, and you think it's easy, and it's difficult. For example, all those parts with F, etc., this long thing. And in the second movement, of course, you have this long marcia, which starts with no instrument playing real notes, just about noise, and it's calculated with this, let's say something also very small details. Let's say this long, we are page 52, 53. You have something classical, you have this rhythm which comes, you don't know from where it comes, so guitar, percussions, brush, and everybody doing that, it goes. And suddenly you have a long spectrum calculated on my way, coming like that, and going down. So it's orchestration, it's crescendo, crescendo, decrescendo. And if you look in detail, in between, you have the vibraphone doing two notes, which is 226. The vibraphone, the two notes of the vibraphone belong both to what you have before and what you have later, but with 1/4 tone difference. So it's a common note. And suddenly you hear the vibraphone with beatings because the other played that with another quartet. And so it's a sort of transition with what you had before, what you have later. So it's an example of through the orchestration you can achieve a lot of thing. Then you have the answer with the tubular flutes. Let's take the third movement. Third movement is a little bit particular because it's a sort of rengaine. It's a sort of repetition of always the same rhythm, which is a rhythm which I built. You find that page 62, measure 8. It's things which imitates. It's a sort of, it comes from the Hindu repertoire in Central Africa. It's a rhythmical misleading, where you have a sort of polymetry of something very simple. So you have something which repeats, you have another layer which repeats with another metric, and then you have something which is regular. And you are completely confused if you listen to Hindu. In the Hindu, you have one flute every 4, but you have something which is 5 plus 3, 3 plus 5. Here it's 5, 4, 5, 7, and it changes a little bit. And it comes, and in terms of orchestration, suddenly you have this cellista playing with the harmonic of the string. It's measure 16. It's a very nice doubling. And all actually belongs to a particular scale, which is a non-octaviating scale that I use a lot when I don't use my spectra. It's a sort of scale, it's like the Maudit of Messiaen, but no octaviation. So when you do that lower, it's not the same octave, so you have to transpose it, and you hear a world which is very strange, and the entire movement is that. And so you have this higher sort of motif, cellista plus the first violin in harmonics to have this strange sound. And actually, you perceive that, you think it comes back, and at the end of the piece, this motif that you heard all the time is imitated by the tubular. It's measured 220, for example, or before. Suddenly, you hear this rhythm that you heard before with the violins and cellista with the tubes which were used for something else. So you have constantly this sort of analogies of functions, and you don't understand from where it comes. Or you have the brush, and then it's exploded into Kitara, the afuche, playing with that, and you don't understand, and with very calculated rhythms. When you write for orchestra, of course, you can't use so many excellent techniques like working with ensemble musicians, new music ensemble musicians who know more, who are more soloists, etc. So you have to compensate through orchestration techniques. You have to orchestrate so that it becomes magical there, but it's an idiom which is different. An orchestra is very particular. They are used to particular techniques, classical techniques. They are used also to particular balance. They are used to play together. So you have to compensate through the orchestration. So it will be my answer. And here you don't have so many new techniques. The rhythm were perhaps difficult, but I know that paradoxically, particularly in Bielefeld, for the first and second movement, the musicians loved that. They thanked me because it was clear. They were, and in Berlin, for the third movement, we started the rehearsing of the third movement with this sort of ritournelle, these things coming. And then there was a pause, and they came outside and they were singing this sort of rhythm, which is in 5/4, 4/4, which is a structure, and they were singing that because it's misleading, but it's not too difficult. And I was happy. I said, okay, I get that. There were some difficulties with the percussions, more in Berlin than in Bielefeld. In Bielefeld, there was no difficulty because they were enthusiasts. They were really motivated to that. So it's another sociology. The orchestral musicians, they play together. It's a lot of people. You take any group in the world and you do 20 people at least, they will have another sociology, another way to interact than if you have 5 people who are more responsible. So there are not so many new playing techniques here. You find more and more in the orchestra winds who accept to play multiphonics there. But I would say it's through the creativity of the orchestration that you can compensate, that you do less new techniques. Orchestras are trying to be in an orchestra and to have a perfect intonation, very good intonation, and to play together. I pay attention of the form in singing the piece. It's a dramaturgy. You tell a story of something. I didn't do that. I started really to concentrate on form when I arrived in Germany, where I learned really about. It's all a discourse. It's difficult. I couldn't speak in detail here, but the way I teach to my students is to sing the piece, to be sure that it's both not frustrating and not boring. That you have surprises on the last right moment, but the surprise are not enough. It's a surprise of surprise, which is more difficult. Surprise of surprise of surprise. So the contrast, this is a consequence of that. It's a technique, but you need to build a discourse which is interesting. When you hear a good lawyer or Obama speaking, it's not linear. There is a joke, he goes back, it's there. So this is what we have to try to do. It's easy to say, difficult to do, but this is what I try to do in this piece, and each movement has a completely different logic because the text is different. For example, the first movement, the text is really present, so the music accompanying. In the second movement, it's the contrary, the text is non-significant, and I open the text. So of course the music is just going forth and back, and you have a lot of repetition of things because you go one step further, one step below, it's there. In the third movement, it's different because it's a sort of ritornelle with a text which is strong but quite sad with interruption where you hear, and you continue and you relaunch the ritornelle with another orchestration. So here it's particular to this piece, and the form is particular to each movement, and every time you have to reinforce the right form for what you have to say. It's different to categorize with word, but it was the challenge of that. I wanted something which is obsessive, almost obsessive, like music in Central Africa, and which helps to progress in the discourse. So I wanted, of course, something which is similar and different each time, which is a little bit provocative because in the new music you have this paradigm never repeats. There in my music I love to repeat, but here it's excessive. It's really a ritornelle. So it was more a sort of cubist ritornelle. Every time you hear that, it's nice, it's more bitter, it's more dissonant here, and you look at another perspective. It was a change. It's difficult to categorize how I did that, but it was really very important for me in this movement here. Orchestrating is really about expressing the best what you can, some feelings. When we orchestrate a piece currently by Schumann on the piano, it's okay, what do you feel here? Is it sad, etc.? But the word is often a reduction of a feeling which is much stronger through the orchestration, because we speak about colors, we speak about sound, we speak about effects, etc. So I had a very clear idea of which character I wanted, but I can't apply an exact word on each derivation, let's say, of this ritornelle. But it was very present, of course.
Meine Damen und Herren Denker!
Forget the score. But the new piece that I'm doing, I do exactly the same thing with the piano now. So this is what I said about style, and you do things, you don't know why. When I use the small tube, I forgot that I used that before, but at the end it makes a style. People say, he makes the same thing, etc. It's this sort of instinct, you know. But yeah, it works very well, and then you have this sort of, here it's a sort of group orchestration. You have a sort of, all the winds starting to do this mosaic going down, then it starts with the it's a canon with strings that start later, and then with the percussions starting later in all mix, and they all fall slowly. And at the end, it's go down, but you have the long notes coming with the brass and the shouting, start with the shouting of the person, and then slowly with the brass, and it becomes a big tutti, and jack, and it stops with its orchestration with a waterphone. Here it's calculated. I have a principles, I call that cross rhythm. It's difficult to explain how it works, but it's something that I use for a very long time. When I started to compose, I then 2 years later discovered that the Pygmies use almost the same thing, and I developed that. So the principle is simple. You have a sort of polyphony of rhythm. You have cells, you have a rhythmical cell, or a small motif, which is very rhythmical, but also with pitch. You have something else, second voice, etc. And then you exchange, you permute the voices, but you permute the voice exchanging the parameters, which means that the pitches, the second voice does the rhythm of the third one, but the pitches of the first one, etc. And the result is that you have something which is always similar, but actually always different. Because the sum is always the same thing, it's always the same contrapoint of rhythm, but it's always different because you have an exchange of timbre, you have an exchange of pitch, you have an exchange of things. So it's completely misleading. And I discovered that the Pygmies do also that. So you have something which looks simple, but it's never the same, but the sum is always the same. And here I do this sort of rhythm that I calculate, and then I calculate them so that they don't stay like that, but they go down. So it's why I say internally it's but so it's great. And then my pressure is always to orchestrate them because it's I exchange the different timbre, and that I use that in many of my music. In my chamber music, of course, it sounds different because you are nearer, so you have only 5. The thing that the rhythm look easy, but you are like children, you are always, it's here, no, it's here, because you exchange the pitches, you exchange the instrumentation, you exchange the thing in different ways. That is something that I use since 2005. I orchestrate the silence, so that is a technique that I do. So silence is with almost nothing. You have air, you have just the waterphone with the vibraphone with motor on, so the percussion with the piano prepared, you have a few attacks, and I have the noise. And the noise is very easy, it's harmonics. I'm not the first one to do that, just a type of harmony, but to make it less instrumental and more electroacoustic, you have a very, very slow glissando. So you have the carpet of harmonics, and you have the slow glissando, which makes that less instrumental, let's say. And here you have the waterphone, of course, and the timbal also doing boom. So everything is orchestrated to have this effect here.
In diesem Gewirr von sich bewegenden und ständig verschobenen Mauern außerhalb aller bekannter Formen des Denkens.
So in this movement the text is really present. You have a lot of text and I want people to understand the text. But then why to make it in music? So here in I, the text is spoken. You have a few misleading. the biggest misleading is who speaks the text. So it's why you have this exchange with all possible combination where they play together. Is it the tenor who plays, so tenor plus bass, then they are together, and you have also some effect like that, which is orchestration. It means there are punctuations. The instruments are punctuation with timpani and the pits rayonnant. Sometimes you have the horn doing air, and you have the piano. It's really almost nothing, but there are punctuations of the text which is spoken, and you don't know who is saying the text. And it increases slowly, with more harmonics, more punctuations, everything, and slowly it becomes more musical, let's say. But it's really accompanying this text, which is very important. The second thing also is that this text, I alternate spoken text, and suddenly you have in 97 another, so the text is from alto, when it's spoken it's from alto, and you have inside this sentence by Rabbi Nachman: never ask your way to someone who knows it, a little bit too much later, and at the end 101 she says alone, never ask your way, you may not get lost, and then you have the orchestration. So you mix two texts and you need to separate the text, so you have the spoken text and you have the Rabbi Nachman in 97. And you see that 97 also a small misleading. Who speaks? You have it's song, before it was only spoken. It's a combination of mezzo, soprano, tenor spoken, and you have the bass who orchestrates the voice with this non-pitched tone. So it becomes one virtual instrument, which is different from before. It's to separate the spoken text by alto and the song or more singing voice by Rabbi Nachman. So I needed this sort of alternation through the orchestration of voices. On Lost, you have everybody finishing the other text, which is a text by Artaud, and say herabgefallen, or fault from the even, and they speak that, and it's orchestrated with all the harmonics of the string, just a small sort of Charino effect, and the timpani doing tone. So it's just an orchestration of Lost. But it's a punctuation. It means it's important to listen to it's a spoken voice, so it has to be very naked, and I play mostly about the combination, etc. of the voice, and they just open the space here. And then, but the rest of the prophet is dead, and we start again in the mic the voice that we barely hear because the orchestra starts again the cross rhythm here. And then you have a big decrescendo until 133, 34, and then you have the silence. And someone who is completely tired, who doesn't know, who try to explain to those rector what that, and he stops, and he says, and in the name of your logic, we tell you, the life stink. And then the music starts again when they shout, and you see here it's the same cross rhythm at O, cross rhythm again, everything, but everybody saying stink, and ha 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 ha, taka taka ta. Everybody says never, whop, they say words, they imitate the voice, imitates the instrument, when the instrument imitates the voice, and then you have a big crazy coda where everybody says noises, onomatopoeia, taka taka ta, and you imitate, and you don't know where you are, and they are a little bit crazy after having tried to imitate, to convince the audience, and they don't. And this is the big coda until the end of this movement, finishing with a big shout. Yeah, here it's true that you have vocals. Man, man, and we open slowly. Man ist, man, man, and of course I try to imitate in the orchestra or to play with ist. You have the percussion doing something. Man, then Preis. So I play with these different sonorities. Ist or Künstler. It's even a little bit kitsch about this word Künstler, where you have this big glissando Künstler, and they try to sing. I try, yes, to play with the sounds of those words. And they repeat. It's one sentence, which is completely deconstructed. It's assembled, like you said, which is orchestrated every time with these intervals, with this falsetti, with this strange, with the harmonics of double bass. You see the first page, both in falsetti and even the contrabass in falsetto, let's say. And attacked, of course, so that we don't recognize. It's one, a mixture. And the tubular flute doing interruptions. We don't know why, and we slowly discover the sentence. Everything, for example, in B, the das. Every time it comes, you have the entire tuning doing very quickly, with, you see, you have a lot of effect. You have a chest whistle, you have some, it's orchestrated, you have das. And man, again, is, I have this, we have in French for the children a small song where you say, Le Petit Prince, you have a long sentence and you sing always, and you remove one vocal every time. And at the end, you have to count in your head, and you have to be together at the end. It's a sort of a game for the children. Here's the same thing. You have the sentence, and you go back, and you have one vocal, and I play with that and with these sounds, which opens a little bit. Yeah. I had this sentence with all the vocal, which are funny also because das can be. There are two das in German, one with one S and one with two S. And I had das, and I try to imagine what is the sound for each one. It's very formalist, it's always the same. Every das has about the same sound, every man has about the same sound. And I was then combining this sort of big orchestra speaking, let's say, and I go back to that and I build different significations in interverting the thing. And sometimes I change it a bit, I go higher, etc. But this is sort of a play of combinations of these different vocals, which builds slowly the sense. And of course, what works particularly, I think, every time he says das, it's das. Sometimes before, sometimes after the, if you take 73, das. And the vas, which sounds like the das, is completely different. I go to the strobas, very low register, vas. And I orchestrate that with the contrabassoon, the horns in the pedal sound, etc. It's very, very strange. And it's a sort of very orchestrated stroba. And the way, and then suddenly he goes to the falsetto, and sometimes he has the tube. So, and since I repeat, but every time in another combination of that, the combination between one thing and the other thing makes a very strange sound. Sometimes you go from the strobas to the falsetto, and I must say Andreas Fischer, the singer, I asked him before, can you really go from one to the other, which is impossible for classical singers. And I say, of course I can. He does that without problem, changing something. Yeah, it's really this game that I have in my music, constantly going to. But here, I was playing with that. And you have the tube, and you vas and man, and you are completely looking for the sense of the sentence, which is the contrary of what you had in the first movement. I had a lot of pleasure, of course, to find every time a sound for each word.
Empfindung.
And at the end in G, measure 50, it goes to empfindet. And just, you open the orchestra. You don't know what happens, so it's a sort of film music with sort of respiration with sing in G. And we have understood the sentence, that's the form is contained and contains form. And then they take their stupid small children brush and they start with a very calculated cell which opens all the time. It's I can show the sketches, and I open, and the orchestra starts to go to the movement, and they go to Kitara to imitate the brush, and this small brush will become the sense of the music. And this is this long coda, which is I am very happy for that coda and how it works. I hope to have something very dramatic. I have no word, and suddenly it starts a sort of thing, which is even it's calculated so that you have cells also, which like before you have rhythmical cells which are always the same rhythm, tack, 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 but I combine them in a very strict things, and they're always longer, and bigger, and longer. And what's close the cells, it's every time you have donk, donk, and then longer, bam, bam, and then suddenly you have these long notes, which are dramatic, and we go on. So it's really intuitive and chosen, and it goes until the end.
Me voici. Me voici devant tous.
Because the text which comes later is highly dramatic. This old poet who comments his life. And that's why I wanted a sort of rest where the person says, me voici, so I'm here in front of you. In front of you. And then it starts.
Soyez indulgents quand vous nous comparez.
I imitated the bells of before. It's a sort of, or perhaps not the bells, but it's sort of a signal, a dramatic signal. Da, ba. And it's alone like that, yeah. Of course, in my music, I have always something which is, I know it's the piano, it's misleading. So just a small thing which helps. And then suddenly in O, he speaks about the sun. He has this moment. So then it becomes completely different music. It's not anymore this tritonal, it's another one, which is really, really happy. And he speaks about the sun, he goes back, and then it starts again with this sort of counterpoint of this sentence, which is here it's very dramatic because the artist says, stop to laugh on us, please don't laugh on us. No, or I say, you can laugh on me, human of everywhere, but even more human from here, because there are so many things I can't tell you, so many things you wouldn't allow me to say, but have pity of me. And parallelly, there is a sentence in Hebrew, in the low voice, all in the very, so the tenor and the bass said that, and it's also from Rabbi Nachman, who says, remember of your future. It's a beautiful sentence, remember of your future, so something also for the artist. So sort of, and you have this artist which is alone at the end. and then he stops with this coda, with the text, just with the flute, which takes the tubes, which take slowly the artist, his or she's, in the form, the small tube, and it becomes the music. And we have with the tube, we hear the small melody with the celesta and the violin of full. It's a sort of coda, cognitive coda, and it turns this return until the end.